It begins in silence, the kind of silence only winter can summon, where breath becomes mist and every twig snap is a warning. Snow lies crusted on the hills of western Massachusetts, and dawn crawls across the frost-bitten earth with no warmth to offer. Beneath the pale gray sky, men gather like shadows outside the courthouse in Northampton. They do not speak loudly. They do not shout. The language of their protest is steadier, measured in the placement of boots, in the closing of ranks, in the loading of muskets with trembling but calloused hands. These are not marauders, not mercenaries. These are farmers, soldiers once, now debtors always. Their hands once held the bayonets that cut empires down, and now they clutch rusted weapons to fend off a government that has forgotten them. The air smells of wet wool, pine smoke, and the bitter tang of fear. It is 1786, and the revolution has ended in name only. The war may be over, but peace has never come. Daniel Shays stands among them, not with glory or title, but with the slow burn fire of a man who has watched promises break like ice beneath boot soles. He does not raise a flag, only his voice, and even that is swallowed by wind. There are no songs for this rebellion, no drums to rally the hearts, only the cold crunch of steps toward a locked courthouse and the unblinking eyes of men who have run out of faith but not resolve. Inside, the judges wait with quills suspended in the air, hearts hammering beneath robes. They have read the petitions, ignored the pleas. Now they watch as the doors remain unopened, the proceedings stalled by a line of men too tired to beg again. Outside, the cold deepens. Horses stamp and snort, steam curling from nostrils like warnings from beasts of burden that know danger when it rides the wind. The grievances are not grand. They are human, aching, small. Taxes too heavy, land taken, debts unpaid. After years of war, these men return to farms eaten by weeds and creditors. Their currency, once honored, now mocked as worthless script. The states cannot feed them, yet demand payment. Prisons grow fat on their fellow soldiers. So they rise, not in conquest, but in refusal. They will not be broken further. In Boston, where wealth clinks in pewter mugs and polished shoes tap over marble, the rebellion is called treason. The elite murmur of mobs and anarchy, though they never saw Saratoga, never buried friends in muddy trenches. And so the legislature calls up a militia. Not of the army, not federal, for no such force exists with strength enough. They fund it privately, a band of mercenaries to crush their countrymen. The rebellion is driven into snow, into failed marches and scattered skirmishes, but it does not die. It leaves no martyr, no decisive stand. But it leaves something else, a chill in the hearts of the powerful, and a whisper inside the halls of Philadelphia. A whisper that the articles, once worn like armor against tyranny, are now shackles. That liberty, without order, becomes starvation in the hills. That the very union they bled for may fracture not from foreign invasion, but from hunger within. In the summer that follows, in a room choked with heat and ambition, the Constitutional Convention convenes. Windows are nailed shut to keep secrets in, though sweat glistens down powdered wigs, and the air smells of ink, stale cologne, and the rot of unseen compromise. Among the delegates, stories of Shays's rebellion pass like ghost tales, men shaking their heads at the terror of too much democracy, the folly of unbound liberty. They speak of order, of federal strength, of a need to suppress insurrection before it becomes revolution once more. But they do not forget the farmers. They do not forget the hunger. Behind every article debated, every clause scribbled and revised, stands the image of men outside a locked courthouse, silent, armed, forgotten. And so, in those stifling days, a new architecture emerges. A constitution, stronger and more binding than the parchment it replaces. Not born from victory, but from fear. Not lifted by celebration, but sealed by necessity. Shays's rebellion did not win. It did not even survive the winter. But it became the specter that shaped the spine of a new republic. Outside the chamber, a boy watches pigeons scatter from a church roof, startled by the sudden strike of the noon bell. He does not know what words are being written within. But he will live by them. He will vote or be denied. He will serve or he will flee. He will inherit a union sewn together by the threads of rebellion. Back in Massachusetts, the fields thaw. Men return to plows with broken spirits and heavier taxes. Daniel Shays disappears into obscurity, pardoned but erased. The rebellion becomes myth, half muttered in taverns, and passed like warnings from father to son. And yet, beneath every ballot cast, beneath every federal law and constitutional argument, the wind still carries the echo of footsteps on frozen earth. Farmers walking slowly toward a locked door, not to overthrow a nation, but to remind it what it owed its people. The candle sputters in the hall. The ink dries. The Union, bruised but breathing, prepares to march forward. But somewhere, out on the edge of memory, where frost clings to barren orchards and soil waits to be turned, the silence waits again, never fully buried, only sleeping. And from that silence, another story begins. A bell tolls in the dark. Not the jubilant chime of victory, nor the mournful knell of defeat, but a lone, measured echo, resounding across marble floors and hushed streets. It is winter in the year 1800, and inside the thick walls of Federal Hall, the fate of a fragile nation flickers like a dying candle. Snow slants against the windows, whispering against the panes, and within the hall, shadows lengthen where truth and ambition collide. Jefferson sits at his writing desk, the ink frozen in its well, his hand trembling not from age, but from the weight of uncertainty. Across the city, Aaron Burr paces behind thick curtains, one eye on the horizon, the other lost in the maze of what could be. The election has come and gone, but no answer follows. The people have spoken, but their voice has split upon the stones of the Constitution. A tie, deadlocked, perfect, terrifying. 73 votes for Jefferson, 73 for Burr. The parchment had not foreseen this. Inside the House of Representatives, the chamber is tense, brittle with expectation. Men speak in whispers, glancing over their shoulders, their powdered wigs dusted with ash from the hearths that fail to warm the room. Alexander Hamilton, hated and feared, moves like a ghost behind the curtain of influence, quietly weighing the consequences of silence. The Constitution, barely a decade old, creaks beneath the weight of its first true crisis. Outside, common folk gather near taverns, their breath visible in the night air. Farmers, tradesmen, freedmen, they wonder if the republic will hold. They remember the war, some with scars to prove it. They know what hangs in balance is not just a name or title, but the shape of the future. In New England, rumors stir of militias forming again, old powder flasks brought down from rafters, sabers removed from above hearthstones, not yet sharpened, but not forgotten. For 36 ballots, the House remains undecided. Each vote a bruise, a wound, a new possibility of fracture. Jefferson watches from the distance, his pride tempered by dread. Burr remains silent, unmoved, as though daring the country to call him king. A republic that swore never to see monarchy again now teeters at the edge of a crownless coup. And then, finally, a shift. James Bayard of Delaware, weary from the weight of inaction, casts a single abstention. The deadlock breaks. Jefferson is chosen, not by landslide, not by triumph, but by exhaustion. Burr retreats into shadows, denied but not defeated. The Union exhales, but not in relief, in caution. What lingers is not victory but revelation. The Constitution, so carefully wrought, had never imagined ambition so cold, so calculated. The process failed, even as the outcome survived. The flaw had revealed itself in silence. There was no clause for human cunning, no paragraph for the manipulation of principle, and so they moved to amend. In quiet urgency, the 12th Amendment is born, not with glory, but necessity. Electors will vote separately for president and vice president, a safeguard, a lesson carved in law. But the ghost of the moment remains. The Republic had peered into the abyss, and though it stepped back, it would never be the same. In the months that follow, Burr's name becomes a whisper and then a warning. He retreats, yes, but not into obscurity. Not yet. A few years from now, he will stand across from Hamilton on the misted banks of the Hudson, pistol in hand. He will fire. And the echo of that shot, born in this winter, in this silence, will tear through the heart of the American vision. For now, the snow melts in the gutters. Federal Hall grows still. The ink has dried. And outside, beneath trees that once held lanterns of liberty, a child walks hand in hand with his mother, unaware that the future has already been rewritten behind him. But still the question hangs in the air like breath in frost. What happens when law bends too far toward power? What becomes of a dream when its guardians forget the weight of trust? The camera does not linger on the celebration. There is none. It holds on Jefferson, alone at his desk, quill in hand, a fresh parchment waiting. He writes not from victory, but from fear and hope and the steady tremor of responsibility. A republic, barely breathing, asking itself what it truly means to endure. And from this breathless space, this silence after survival, a new challenge waits, stirring in the shadows. It waits in the courtrooms where justice is reshaped by war. It waits in the clang of prison gates closed by soldiers, not judges. It waits in the steady erosion of rights whispered away under the name of safety. For the Constitution, though scarred by its first crisis, will be tested again, not by ballots this time, but by bayonets. There will come a moment, not too far ahead, when the Union will split not over tied votes, but over chained bodies and burning towns. When habeas corpus will be suspended with a stroke of a pen, and men will vanish into military jails without charge. When a single man, president, commander, martyr in waiting, will face the abyss and wonder if liberty itself must be silenced to survive. That man will not be Jefferson. He will be taller, heavier in sorrow, quieter in his grief. He will wear a beard grown from war and eyes worn by midnight vigils. He will sign orders that terrify him, then walk alone through corridors where oil lamps flicker like dying hopes. He will wrestle with a nation tearing itself apart, wondering if the parchment he swore to defend must bend or break to hold it together. But before him comes the reckoning. Before him comes the storm. And so the scene fades, not with triumph, not with peace, but with uncertainty. The electoral crisis of 1800 had been a mirror held up to a young nation's face. It showed ambition disguised as principle. It showed fragility where strength was claimed. It showed that even a republic born from revolution was not immune to slow corrosion from within. The final image is not the Capitol dome, nor the White House in moonlight. It is a candle burning low on a wooden desk, wax pooling like blood beneath it. A letter sits beside it, half finished, addressed to no one, or perhaps to everyone who will come after. Its final words are blurred, but the last line reads, "We must bind our future not only with law, but with conscience." Outside, the wind rises. The door creaks open to the next chapter. And somewhere, already, boots march toward the courtroom, not as defendants, but as conquerors. The Constitution will face its darkest hour, not in ink, but in iron. And that story begins now. A clang echoes in the dungeon. Chains rattle against cold stone walls, mixing with the sharp rasp of hemp rope tightening around wrists. Oil lamps gutter in flickering candlelight, casting skeletal shadows that drift across the rough flagstones. A political prisoner hunches in darkness. His name echoes faintly in freedom. For now. It is 1864, on the cusp of transformation and terror. In a nation torn by war, justice itself has been conscripted. Inside the courthouse, the air tastes of stale parchment and fear. Soldiers stand at every threshold, bayonets angled like silent threats. Lawyers pace the corridors, robes trailing dust and uncertainty. In this charged silence, Clement Vallandigham rises to speak, not from a place of triumph, but from exile. His voice, carried by rumors across battle lines, becomes a hammer struck against liberty. He stands accused of undermining the army, of twisting words into seditious whispers. Habeas corpus lies suspended, a thread pulled taut until it snaps. Outside, the city roils. Families peer from shuttered windows. Smoke rises from distant kitchens like sorrow's exhalation. Children shiver beneath blankets, listening to the night bells toll hour by hour, counting lives lost not on fields, but behind locked cell doors. The tension seeps into every hearth. There is law, yes, but there is also force, unyielding and blind. The Constitution, meant to bind the Republic, instead buckles beneath urgency. In the tribunal, military judges dispense verdicts where juries should have stood. The steel of order overrides the soft grain of justice. Wooden benches creak beneath uniformed backs, and the odor of sweat and oil permeates each word delivered. Vallandigham is condemned, stripped of citizenship, cast out into exile beyond enemy lines. The courtroom door slams behind him, for soldiers, not citizens, have sealed his fate. And still, the war grinds on. Families torn by land and by oath cross state lines in search of solace. Soldiers choke on grief in muddy encampments, each drumbeat echoing the grief of a nation at war with itself. The air is thick with choking acrid smoke from black powder and the odor of unburied bodies in winter fields. Moral certainty fractures before necessity. The government justifies each suspension as a shield, but for some, it becomes a cage. Within those chambers where Vallandigham spoke, echoes remain. They haunt the minds of civilians who watch friends disappear overnight. They echo in churches where preachers plead for mercy, in homes where mothers weep for sons never to return. The nation's promise, born in revolution, stands wounded. In desperation, a president signs away safeguards, believing that only strength can preserve the fragile state. Still, shadows lengthen. In quiet rebellion, reporters smuggle stories of detainees held without charge. They publish lists of absences, names fading into obscurity. They whisper of a nation that forgot the cost of silence. Meanwhile, the exiled escapes into rebel territory, survival etched on every measured step across border lines. He becomes a symbol, not of defeat, but of warning. The moment stretches. When must order bend? When does survival become tyranny? The chamber door opens. A lone guard crosses thresholds into dusk. The lamps inside sputter, and silence grows thick again. Yet in that darkness lie questions heavier than any verdict. Can unity endure when its foundation trembles? Can a republic born of freedom remain secure when rights vanish in the name of saving them? A feather quill rests beside a blank page on a wooden desk, ink dried or never used. A man, no longer a soldier, but a symbol of restraint, stares at it, pondering the fragile shape of law and liberty. He hears the distant toll of bells, counting hours not of peace, but of suspension. The war continues, but freedom waits. A candle burns low at the windowsill, wax pooling in soft, molten tears. Outside, the night wind stirs damp curtains and cold resolve. In the hush, the question unfolds like smoke. When steel closes doors, what remains of justification? The screen does not fade on verdicts or exile. It holds instead on the unmanned flag outside the courthouse, tattered and silent, not quite lowered, not fully honored. The nation stands at its own crossroads, where law and force converge, and the next chapter presses against a fragile pause. And from the gloom, a new reckoning prepares to rise. A trial not before judges, but across battlefields and hearts alike. The room is too quiet, not with peace, but with fear. A velvet curtain trembles slightly, though there is no wind. The air hangs thick with dust and sweat, and in the chamber where the highest law is spoken, something begins to unravel. March 1857. The Supreme Court chambers in Washington. The lamps flicker, catching glints off the black robes of judges who sit like statues, remote, unblinking, robed in authority but stripped of mercy. Chief Justice Roger Taney lowers the parchment with fingers that do not tremble, though they should. His voice is steady as he reads the opinion. The words fall like stones. No person of African descent, whether enslaved or free, can be a citizen of the United States. The silence that follows is not of awe. It is the breathless stillness of a room that has just stepped into fire. Outside, the streets are still. A child plays with a stick in the dust, unknowing. A blacksmith wipes soot from his brow, listening faintly through open windows. In the North, abolitionist hearts freeze with horror. In the South, planters nod solemnly, their grip tightening on both ledgers and chains. And far from the courtroom, Dred Scott waits, not with hope, but with dignity worn thin. A man who once stepped on free soil with the belief that it could change his fate. A man who asked not for power, not for land, but for a sliver of the promise etched into the founding breath of a nation. That freedom was not a gift to be earned. It was a truth to be remembered. But the court has forgotten. The parchment that once spoke of inalienable rights now shouts something colder, something hollow. The decision shatters more than one life. It carves a wound into the Constitution itself, a betrayal sewn into its fibers, a declaration that the law will not shield the chained, but the chain. The ruling denies Congress the power to prohibit slavery in the territories. Missouri becomes not a compromise, but a lie. Popular sovereignty is rendered dust. Slavery is no longer an aberration. It is protected, blessed by black-robed priests of legality. In taverns and train stations, the ripple spreads. Men shout, women weep, ministers thunder from pulpits. A quiet fury builds. Not in mobs, not in violence, but in the ink of newspaper columns and the fists clenched beneath tables. The North, long cautious, now finds a mirror held to its soul, and the image reflected is intolerable. And yet the South celebrates. For them, this is vindication, legal, complete, sanctified. The specter of federal restriction is banished. Slavery may now spread root and vine across every inch of Western soil. The plantations will stretch further, the auctions will multiply. And in backrooms lit by candle stubs and tobacco smoke, men begin to speak not of union, but of permanence. that the institution they defend is not a necessity, but a divine right. The Constitution, once balanced precariously, tips. In the North, a young lawyer from Illinois studies the ruling by lamplight. Abraham Lincoln, whose gaze will soon weigh the fate of millions, sees in these pages not just a decision, but a prophecy. The House divided, the collision ahead. In the South, a firebrand named Jefferson Davis whispers to his allies. The court has given them everything they ask, yet still they prepare for war. For even victory reveals their greatest fear, that what is given by courts may one day be taken by ballots. And somewhere in between bayous and bell towers, between city parlors and lonely cabins, Dred Scott breathes. A free man now, by purchase, but bound forever to history. His name etched into every newspaper, every sermon, every whispered warning. He did not ask to become a symbol, but he has become one. A man who asked for justice and received the Constitution's darkest echo in reply. The page turns, but it does not close. In its wake come the Kansas fires, the bleeding border wars, John Brown's boots on Harper's Ferry floorboards. In its shadow rise the battalions, the flags, the graveyards that will soon bloom like iron orchards across the land. Yet in this moment, in the hush after judgment, the nation holds its breath. Some still believe it can hold. That law can heal what law has broken, that the parchment can be rewritten not in blood, but in reason. But others know, deep in their bones, that the storm has already begun, that the Constitution has cracked, and beneath that crack, something darker waits. The last image lingers not on robes or gavel, but on the torn edge of a single document, a letter unsigned, addressed to no one, caught in a gust of courthouse wind. It flutters through the open window, disappearing into the street below, as if the nation itself cannot bear the weight of what it has written. In that silence, something stirs. And from it, the next chapter draws breath, not from courts or congresses, but from fields soaked in more than soil. A reckoning approaches, and it does not ask, it marches. The snow fell like ash, silent, steady, each flake a quiet verdict on a weary capital. Washington, 1820. Beneath the weight of a brutal winter, the city creaked like a ship under siege. The wind whispered along shuttered alleyways and slid beneath the doors of the Capitol, where the candles still burned late into the evening. Cloaks were drawn tighter, inkpots frozen solid. And inside the chamber, a map was being drawn, not of land, but of fracture. The question was simple. Would Missouri enter the Union free or enslaved? But the answer was not, for it was not Missouri that lay on the table. It was the nation, cut open, laid bare. Its veins traced in rivers and borderlines, its future sliced by ideology, fear, and the echo of chains. The room reeked of sweat, oil, and pine smoke. Men argued not just in voices but in glares, in the trembling of knuckles on cane tops, in the way some looked away when the word slave was spoken. In the North, the tide of abolition swelled, still faint, still scattered but rising. In the South, pride hardened into steel. Cotton fortunes grew fat and bloated, soaking the soil in silence. Yet both sides knew the balance was perilously thin. 11 free states, 11 slave. Missouri would break the tie, and what followed would not just be policy, it would be prophecy. Thomas Cobb of Georgia stood, frost-lining his beard from the ride in. His voice trembled not from cold, but from rage. If you persist, he warned, the Union will be dissolved. And others, quiet men trembling with fear more than fury, nodded in reluctant agreement. Then came the compromise. A line, a single inked line, 36 degrees, 30 minutes. North of it, freedom. South of it, bondage. Missouri would enter as slave. Maine, hastily cleaved from Massachusetts, would balance as free. For now, the scales were even. For now, the house did not fall. But it cracked. No cannon fired. No swords were drawn. Yet something sacred had shifted. In creating peace, they had named the division. And on that map, on that long, trembling parchment that smelled of wax and frayed nerves, was born a wound that would never truly heal. Jefferson, long retired, wrote in private horror. This moment, he confessed, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. He foresaw what others refused to see, that a nation so precisely split would not remain so forever. It would tilt, it would break, and in the break it would bleed. Still, the compromise passed, and men returned to their homes, believing perhaps they had saved something. The bells rang, the horses were saddled, the ink dried, but in the fields, nothing changed. The chains still clinked in the cotton rows. Children still watch their mothers sold at auction blocks. The Constitution, stretched now to accommodate bondage, did not sing more sweetly. It groaned quietly beneath the weight of its contradiction. In the North, newspapers applauded restraint, but in whispered corners, radicals scrawled manifestos. The price of peace, one wrote, has been justice itself. Churches murmured prayers. The Underground Railroad, still nascent, shifted slightly deeper into shadow. There was no war yet, but the scent of it hovered, like a storm still beyond the hills, but crawling closer. And beneath it all, the line remained. A line drawn not in soil, but in soul. At night, in an inn on the road between Kentucky and Ohio, a man leaned over a candle and traced the new boundary on a map. His finger hovered above Missouri, then moved eastward. "This," he muttered, "will not hold." His companion said nothing, only nodded, eyes fixed on the flame that flickered, as if uncertain whether to burn or fade. That winter, the snow thickened. It piled on rooftops, coated the statues of liberty and justice outside courthouses. It silenced the footsteps of the slaves who carried firewood before dawn. It covered the frozen mud where runaway prince once led northward. And it buried, for a time, the sound of the coming rift. But snow melts, spring comes, and with it, questions awaken. How long can a compromise last when it bargains with suffering? How many lines can be drawn before they become trenches? And what becomes of a nation when its laws protect chains more fiercely than people? These questions, unanswered, rise like steam from the thawing earth. The screen holds not on debate, not on celebration, but on a single image, a cracked bell above the Capitol dome, motionless in the cold. A bell that has not yet rung its warning, but soon will. Its silence is not peace, it is preparation. And from that hush, the next chapter begins. Not with words, but with fire. It begins with heat, a heavy, breathless heat that clings to the skin and makes silence feel louder. July 1787. Philadelphia trembles under the weight of summer. The air does not move. It pools in the corners of Independence Hall, where the shutters are nailed shut to keep prying ears at bay. The scent inside is human, stale coats, sweat, pipe smoke, and melted wax. Quills scratch over parchment with the urgency of men trying to mend something already torn. They sit around a table not as brothers, but as boarders. Some wear the powder of aristocracy, others the rough homespun of the frontier. All wear worry. For weeks they have debated, argued, withdrawn. Small states threaten to walk away. Large states threaten to rule by numbers alone. The Union, barely born, nearly broken, sits in that room, fragile as a child's breath. Overhead, flies buzz through warm currents. A delegate from Connecticut coughs, dabs his brow, and glances at the door. Some think of home, of farms left to grow wild, of debts unpaid. Some think of the war, of winter at Valley Forge, the taste of powder smoke at Yorktown. They wonder if the blood spilled then is now being diluted by ink. In the corner, George Washington says little. His gaze burns steady, unreadable. He watches the men bicker, but does not interrupt. He knows what they are risking. Not just failure, but a return to chaos. A return to 13 voices, screaming over one another across state lines. He knows how revolutions devour their own silence. Then comes the threat. Roger Sherman and Oliver Ellsworth rise from the Connecticut delegation, not with noise, but with balance. A compromise. One house by population, one house by equal vote. It lands on the table like a rope stretched over a chasm. The men lean in. They do not cheer. They do not trust it. But they see in it a way forward. A narrow bridge between sovereignty and survival. And still, the ghost circle of monarchy, of rebellion, of Shays's ragged farmers who had shown how quickly a starving man could become a soldier again, of slaves in the South, invisible yet counted, silent yet weighed for representation, of native lands carved on maps, stolen without apology. All of it lingers in the room, unsaid, but not absent. They write anyway. Parchment is stained, articles reshaped, the preamble forged, one word at a time. We the people, though not all people, life, liberty, and the pursuit of order. They stitch together a skeleton, bones of principle wrapped in flesh of necessity. The ink dries slowly, as if the paper itself is unsure. Outside, rain begins to fall. It taps against the shutters, soft and steady, a blessing or a warning. Inside, the mood shifts, the bickering subsides. Men nod silently. The compromise, fragile, imperfect, is accepted. A hush follows, not of relief, but of reverence. They know this moment will echo. Later, as they leave, the city watches in silence. A washerwoman catches sight of Madison's tired face and wonders what was decided. A blacksmith leans on his hammer and prays the fighting is done. A slave guides a carriage through muddy ruts, unaware that the paper inside it does not speak for him. In time, they will celebrate. They will call it triumph. Call it genius. But here, now, it is only survival. The Constitution is born not with fireworks, but with fear. It is a map out of the wilderness drawn with shaking hands. In the hall's echo, one question remains. What happens when the compromise itself becomes the burden? When the line they drew to save the Union begins to split it again? When the silence they kept around slavery festers into war? That storm is not yet here, but the wind has shifted. A final image, a quill laid gently beside a candle still burning. The wax pools like blood. The flame flickers once, as if deciding whether to stay. And somewhere beyond the brick walls of Independence Hall, a boy runs barefoot through the mud, chasing a paper scrap carried by the breeze. It bears no words, just the smell of ink and hope. He doesn't know it yet, but it will shape the world he inherits. The camera lingers on that scrap, caught in the wind, because the parchment has been signed. But the story is only beginning.